Thanks for joining us once again for part 4 of the series, The Final Gospel. Last time we saw that even now as we speak, there is a judgment taking place in which all the cases of those who have ever professed to be righteous throughout the ages are being investigated. The reason why this judgment is taking place is because when Christ returns, he is giving out rewards to everyone. For as it tells us in Revelation chapter 22 and verse 12, "And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be." The word reward here has a positive and negative connotation, because for the righteous the reward will be everlasting life, and for the wicked it will be death. However, how does Christ determine who gets what reward? The answer is that his judgment will be based on his own law, even the 10 Commandments. The Bible tells us in James chapter 2 and verse 12, "So speak ye and so do, as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty." What is this law of liberty, you might ask? The context of James chapter 2 and verse 12 lets us know exactly what law is being referred to by saying in verses 10 and 11, "For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. For he that said, 'Do not commit adultery,' said also, 'Do not kill.' Now if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law." Notice that 2 commandments from the 10 commandments are quoted. One is the 7th commandment concerning adultery, and the other is the 6th commandment concerning murder. There is no doubt that the 10 commandments are the law of liberty, contrary to the popular opinion that it is the law of bondage. It is with this understanding that the 10 commandments will be the standard of the judgment that we now turn to the latter part of Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7, which states, "And worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters." This commandment, like the verses we just read from James chapter 2 and verses 10 through 12, comes almost verbatim from the 10 commandments. More specifically, the 4th commandment. Now this 4th commandment in Exodus chapter 20 and verses 8 through 11 states, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the 7th day, the Sabbath day, and hallowed it." Now remember, this statement at the end of Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7 said that in light of the judgment, we are to worship him who made heaven and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. The question is, who made all these things? Out of the entire Decalogue, the 4th commandment dealing with the Sabbath is the only law that tells us who made heaven and earth and the sea. As it states in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." This is crucial to understand, because this means that when in the book of Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7, it quotes the Sabbath commandment found in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11, it is actually telling us that in order to truly worship God in light of the judgment now taking place, we must then keep his law, all 10 of them, which includes the Sabbath. The majority of the Christian world is saying that the law is done away with. Yet, there seems to be a contradiction, because if the law is done away with, then we can murder, steal, commit adultery, worship other gods, and bear false witness. However, every Christian in their right mind knows that to believe this is foolishness. Here is an even greater contradiction. If the law is still binding, then how is it that the majority of Christendom is only keeping 9 out of the 10 commandments? Can we really pick and choose which one of the laws of God we will keep? Can we make 9 of them literal and spiritual and then totally spiritualize the 4th commandment? As a Christian, I had to realize that the 10 commandments are not the 10 suggestions, but commandments. These are the requirements of God, my friends. So serious are these requirements that Jesus himself kept the Sabbath. For as it tells us in Luke chapter 4 and verse 16, and he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. However, some may say that when Christ died, the law, including the Sabbath, was nailed to the cross. But even after the death of Christ, the apostles followed the same custom of Jesus. For it says concerning the apostle Paul, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Even in the new heavens and the new earth, we will keep the Sabbath. For as the Bible says in Isaiah chapter 66, verses 22 and 23, for as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. The reason that this commandment, out of all the others, starts off with the phrase, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy, is because it was already made holy at creation. Out of all of the 7 days of creation, of the creation week, God blessed, sanctified, and rested only on one of them. For Genesis chapter 2 and verses 2 and 3 tells us, and on the 7th day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Realize that God blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. The reason that he rested on it was not because he was tired, but that he might lay out before us an example of what we should do after working 6 days of the week. In such a busy world in which we are being trained to be workaholics, God is calling us to rest on the day which he has set aside, even the 7th day, which is Saturday. However, can this be legalism? If God is calling us to rest on this day, can it be legalism? To come away from our jobs and our stressful work week should be a joy. God did this for you. You see, when the Sabbath was made, there was no Jew, but only 2 human beings, through which all humanity came. This means that God instituted the Sabbath not only for the Jew, but for all mankind. No wonder Jesus said in Mark chapter 2 and verses 27, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Jesus proclaims himself the Lord of this day. This is powerful because that means that he was the one who rested after creating the Sabbath in Genesis. He was the one who sanctified and blessed the day for the benefit of mankind. So then why would he at his death abolish that day? You see, the law that was nailed to the cross when Christ died was not the law of God, but the laws of Moses, or the ceremonial laws, dealing with the sacrifices of lambs and other animals, which took place all throughout the Jewish year, sometimes on specific feast days, which were called Sabbaths. These Sabbaths and feast days were nailed to the cross, not the Sabbath of the 10 Commandments. For God's law is as unchangeable as he is. History shows us clearly that the early church, Christian church, also kept the 7th day holy, long after Jesus' death. However, the formation of a great system during and after the days of the early apostolic church changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. The Bible calls this system Babylon. So stay tuned, and you will find out just who Babylon is and how this system changed the Sabbath. But for now, thanks for joining us at Ultimate Cry Ministries, a ministry born with the purpose of reaching you, equipping you, and freeing you with the only truth that can make you free, Jesus Christ.